Trzebania Concentration Camp, 1944. Chapter 14. Our job was to move a pile of rocks. There were big rocks, and it was a big pile. The rocks were heavy and rough, and we were given no wheelbarrows or gloves. The rocks had to be moved from one side of the assembly field to another, and the Nazis yelled at us and beat us if we were too slow or if they thought we were carrying a rock that was too small for us. I put my arms round another stone and lifted, my back crying out in pain. The rock tore and scraped at my skin as I cradled it to my chest and staggered across the yard to dump it into the new pile. Then I did it again, and again. One of the other men stumbled and collapsed, and the guards fell on him with sticks and clubs. I hefted another rock and kept working while I tried not to let the Nazis see how afraid I was. They were like Amon-Goth's dogs. They could smell fear on you, liked nothing better than to attack you when you were at your weakest. By midday, my arms and hands and chest were so raw and bruised I couldn't have gone on, but by then we were finished. I would have dropped it to the ground, but I knew I would just be beaten for it, so I stood with the others, wobbled on my shaking legs with the guards to tell us what the new task that awaited us was. "Good," said the SS officer in charge of us. "Now, move it back." I blinked stupidly, not understanding at first. We had just worked all morning to move this pile of stones across the camp, and now the Nazis were changing their minds? The other prisoners and I looked at one another to see if we heard right. "I said move this pile back to where it was," the SS officer yelled. He moved through our group, hitting us with a stick until we moved. "You will move it to where it was, and then you will move it again. Now work!" Such was life at Trzebania concentration camp. I had been transferred there after a short time in mining salt in Weslica. Had been hard, but Trzebania has been worse. Because Trzebania, the Nazis played games. The Nazis were making us work just to work. This was all a game to them, like a hand of cards or a soccer match, and we were the ball to be kicked around for sport. My arms shook as I picked up the same stone that I had just carried across the compound, but not from the weariness this time, from fury. I fumed as I hefted the stone and trudged back across the muddy compound. But they wanted me to be angry. They wanted me to say something or frown or mumble curses at them. They were watching me for it, watching all of us, like schoolyard bullies. They wanted to provoke us, and then they would beat us as punishment. At the Trzebania, I worked all day moving piles of rocks back and forth, digging holes 6 feet deep and then filling them back in again. I ate watery broth and week-old bread once a night and passed out on a wooden pallet with no mattress or pillows or blankets. I was an animal to them, a pack mule, but beasts were never treated so poorly. Working animals were expensive. They had value. I was a Jew. We were lower than animals. They could kill as many of us as they wanted, but there would always be another trainload of us to take our place. But as angry as I was at the Nazis, I was even angrier at my fellow prisoners. How could we take this abuse so quietly, so meekly, with our heads bowed and a quick tip of the cap to our killers? Yes, the Nazis had clubs and guns, but there were far more of us than there were of them. If we all turned on them at once, we could overcome them. We were not animals being led to the slaughter. We were thinking, feeling human beings. One day, in the middle of hauling rocks again, I vowed not to be killed without a fight. My father, Uncle Moshe, the Jewish elders, they were all wrong. We shouldn't be trying to survive. We should be trying to win. Instead of waiting for the British or Americans or the Russians to save us, we should be saving ourselves. I'm not going to let them line me up on the edge of a pit and shoot me, I thought myself. I will fight back. I will kick the Nazis in the shins. I will run. I won't go like a sheep to the slaughter. At roll call that night, someone else had the same thought. One of the Nazis struck him with a club, but instead of taking the beating meekly, the prisoner raised his arms and grabbed the stick. He wrestled it from the shocked officer's hands and struck him in the head with it, kicking his Nazi hat into the muck, striking his arms and raised again and again. Yes, yes, I thought, there it was. Together we can take them all. I looked around anxiously to see if anyone else felt as I did, if anyone else would take up the charge, but everyone had their heads down. No, this was our chance. If we fought together, crack! I jumped at the sound. With the fiery spark of a pistol, it was all over. The prisoner who had fought back crumpled to the ground, dead from a bullet to the brain, and the assaulted officer was hurried away from the assembly grounds. The camp soldiers appeared in forces around the edges of our lines, pointing rifles at us, and the camp commandant hurried out from his cozy office. When he heard a report from his officers, he turned on the prisoners. "You!" he cried, pointing at a boy who had fallen standing right next to the man who fought back. "You are a part of this plot to escape." What? The boy stammered. He wasn't much older than me. No, I don't even know him. The guards grabbed the boy and dragged him to the front of our lines where the Nazis had built gallows for hanging prisoners. And this man, the commandant said, pointing into the crowd, and this one, and him, and him, and him. He was picking people at random now in his fury, punishing innocent people for the dead man's effrontery. I shrank back. I recognized the boy and two of the other men from my barrack. Like me, they couldn't even have known who the dead man was. I'm innocent, the boy my age sobbed as they dragged him up to the gallows and put the hanging noose around his neck. I've never tried to escape. I promise I've done everything you've asked. I shook with helplessness and rage, but also with fear. This is what fighting back earned you. More abuse, more death. Half a dozen Jews would be murdered today because one man refused to die without a fight. To fight back was to die quickly and to take others with you. This was why prisoners went meekly to their deaths. I had been so resolved to fight back, but I knew then that I wouldn't. To suffer quietly hurt only you. To suffer loudly, violently, angrily, to fight back was being hurt and pain and death to others. Please, the boy cried, I've never tried to escape. I'm innocent. He looked out on all of us, those of us with courage to look up from the ground. Remember, he begged us, I did nothing. The hangman kicked the chair out from under him, and the boy's body jerked as his neck was broken. I kept my head held high and watched, vowing never to forget. Chapter 15. My work detail was on its way to the quarry to break more rocks one morning when another capo came to speak to ours. The two capos talked for a moment, and our capo ordered us to stop. I kept my head down, but tried to look around with my eyes to see what was going on. Something different was happening, and different was never good. Our capo kept us standing there without saying anything else for a long time. What was happening? Why had we stopped? Were we in trouble? Were we going to be killed? The other prisoners had to be asking themselves the same question, but of course none of us spoke. To speak was to invite a beating. We would need to be told our fates when our captors decided we needed to know. Turn around, our capo said at last. March! We headed away from the quarry, which would have been a relief if I thought we were going someplace better. We passed a place where prisoners were shot over the pits they had dug for themselves, and I said a silent prayer of thanks. But then we passed the barracks and the main gate. We were being marched to the depot. A train waited at the side rail, but it didn't have passenger cars. It was fitted out with cattle cars. We were being transported like livestock. We were herded up a ramp into one of the train cars under the whips and clubs of the capos and the SS officers. I was one of the first ones inside. The car was empty and looked recently washed, but it smelled of urine and vomit and excrement. I reeled back, but there was nowhere to go. In! The guards yelled at us, and I was pushed up against the far wall. More and more prisoners were forced into the car. They packed so many of us in, I was crushed between three other men and the wall, but it was built like that for everybody. I couldn't even raise my arm. I felt trapped again, like I had felt under the floorboards and down in the salt mine. I couldn't be here. I had to have space, air. I can't breathe! I can't breathe! A man at the other end of the car started to scream, giving voice to my panic. Let me out! I need to get out of here! He kicked at the wall of the cattle car. Please, I can't take it! Crack! An SS officer shot the man through the wall of the cattle car, and he no longer had to worry about not being able to breathe. If I panicked, if I broke, I would suffer the same fate. Instead, I worked my way toward the ventilation grate on the wall of the train car and pressed my face against up to it, breathing in the fresh air from the outside. My heart still raced, but at least I could breathe. We stood squeezed into the train car for half a day while the Nazis loaded more prisoners onto the other cars. We had no food, no water, and no way to go to the bathroom. Soon I understood why the train car had smelled so bad, and only would smell worse before this ordeal was through. Late in the afternoon, the train lurched and we were away. None of us knew where we were going. I hoped it would be better than Trzebina, but by now I knew not to dream. False hope only made things worse. It was cold along the wall of the cattle car. Wind whipped through the spaces between the car's wood slats, making me shiver, but at least I had air. The prisoners in the middle complained of being too hot and too close and not being able to breathe. So I shivered while I sucked in the freezing air into my lungs, and I did not complain. As the train made its way to wherever we were going, I watched the landscape slide by. Plazow, Wizlica, Trzebina, they had all been right around my Krakow home. Now I was truly leaving home and seeing the outside world for the first time. I had never imagined it would be under these circumstances. I saw snow-covered fields, farmhouses with electric lights burning in the windows, forests, a river, a busy road with cars and trucks. After all my time in these work camps, it was strange to see people in the real world, eating dinner and going to school and watching movies. But that world was for non-Jews. My world was concentration camps and salt mines, starvation, and cattle cars. The train slowed and the other prisoners began to stir. Were we at our final destination? Did anyone recognize where we were? I watched through the grate as the little station slid into view, but I couldn't make out the name of the station sign. I could see people, though. Regular people. Polish men carrying briefcases. Polish women pushing strollers. A child in a blue coat pointed at our train, and her mother turned her away. 2 boys waited with their parents beside a stack of luggage. They were going on a trip, maybe on vacation. "They're going to turn you into soap, Jews," one of the boys yelled. He couldn't have been much older than 5 or 6. "No," his older brother said. "They're taking you to the gas chambers." The boys scooped up snow from the platform and threw snowballs at the train. One of them exploded on the grate near me, and I was showered with slush and ice. I was angry until I realized that snow was water and that I was dying of thirst. I licked off what I could from my face and my shirt. The train lurched and we were off again, and the boys taunted us and throwing more snowballs at us. We left. "And you wanted to escape," a man near me whispered to another man. "You wanted to run off into the woods and fight. But do you see what the rest of them think about us? These people would sell you back to the Nazis for a sack of potatoes and then toast you at the dinner table." We did not arrive at our destination that night, nor the entire next day. We still had no food or water. I drifted in and out of sleep, that blessed escape from hunger. I would have collapsed from exhaustion if I hadn't been held up by prisoners squeezed in around me. One morning, or night, I couldn't tell which it was, I woke up to find the man next to me leaning heavily on my shoulder. I shook him to wake him up, but his eyes wouldn't open. Something about the way he stood there, something about the way he moved, stiff and awkward, made my skin prickle. His flesh was gray, like a musulman's. His lips cracked and frozen at the corners. And then I realized he wasn't breathing. The man leaning on me was dead. I squirmed and twisted, trying to push him away, but there was nowhere for either of us to go. The men near me roused from their sleep to grumble at me to be still, and I gave up. The dead man would be my companion until we got to wherever it was that we were going. I worried I wouldn't be able to sleep again, knowing there was a corpse leaning on me, but soon the cold took me and I re-entered the half-awake world of barely alive. I woke again to an orange horizon. A sunrise? A sunset? My throat was cold and dry, my tongue like a burlap. It had snowed while I was asleep, and the ventilation grate near me was covered with this stuff, grayish-white from the engine's smoke. I tried to reach with my tongue to lick some of the precious frozen water off the grate, but it was just out of reach. My arms were pinned at my sides by the crush of people in the car, but I wanted that snow. I needed that snow to survive. Slowly, painfully, I pulled my arm up between the dead man and the sleeping one beside us. The sleeper muttered in his sleep as I jostled him, but he pushed my hand back down without even waking. I had to have that snow. I pushed again, and again the man pushed back. I elbowed him in his sunken stomach. He whimpered in his sleep and stopped fighting. My arm was free. I scooped snow from the grate. My thin fingers were so cold they were blue, but I didn't care. I shoved the snow in my mouth like a toddler eating cake. My throat was so dry I gagged on it, but I forced the melting snow down, ignoring the shocking pain in my teeth from the cold. It was water, wonderful water. Not even a pastry at the corner bakery on Lawaska Street that ever tasted so good. With a pang, I remembered going there on Thursdays with my father, eating a treat and watching the pigeons in the park while my father read his newspaper. I pushed the memory away and reached for more gray snow. The orange horizon turned out to be a sunrise, which turned into a bright blue winter morning. Our train slowed again, this time not for a station. We were shunted to a sidetrack while another train of cattle cars passed us, going the opposite direction. The other train slowed, then stopped alongside. "You there!" someone called from across the way. "You there, in the other train!" I slinted through the slats in the wall. There were other people on the train packed in like us. Were we all Jews being shipped around occupied Poland like coal or meat? What? A man a meter or two away from me answered. What does your train say? Where are we going? The other man asked. I hadn't thought the trains would have our destinations on them. Well, most trains did, I remembered. There were plates at the top that could be switched out for different destinations. I peered through the slats for the other car, trying to see. Treblinka, I called, seeing the placard at last. It says you're going to Treblinka. I didn't know the place. Where are we going? Birkenau, the other man in the train called. I never heard of Birkenau either, but the word spread through the train like scared whispers. Birkenau, Birkenau, Birkenau. The other train rocked and started moving again, and soon we too were on our way. The man next to me, the live one, mumbled and shook his head. What is it? I asked. What's Birkenau? Another work camp? You don't go to Birkenau to work, the man said, his voice hoarse and dry. You go there to die. Birkenau isn't a concentration camp. It is a death camp. A chill ran through me. The boys at the depot had been right, I realized. They had known the Nazis were going to kill us. They were going to turn us into soap. The train rocked back and forth, back and forth. Outside, it began to snow again. You want my advice? The man next to me rasped. When they take us to the gas chambers, try to stand right under the exhaust vents. Is that how you survive? The man laughed, or tried to. No, you won't survive. None of us will. But if you stand under the exhaust vents, you won't suffer as long before you die.